The first patch of set 11 is here, and of course there's some spicy changes. Firstly, there's some of the biggest nerfs we've seen in a long time. Particularly Bard, kog'maw and Yasuo are getting completely slapped. But this patch also brings the new Sentinel portals, which are awesome. Also, thank God that Ghostly is getting nerfed. But there are some changes that are indirect buffs to Ghostly. There's also buffs to some of my favourite units in this set like Diana and Soraka, and most of the hero augments are similarly seeing buffs that has me worried because of how powerful they can be. Then we also have an adjustment to Kayle that should make her feel like an actual carry, and probably the biggest change in this patch is a pass on the item system to nerf the overperforming items like Morello and Stoneplate and make the underperforming items better. But what are the indirect Ghostly buffs? How are kog'maw and Yasuo turbo nerfed? And what are these new Sentinel portals? But before we get into that, remember to subscribe. So let's talk about the new portals. This patch will bring a rework to two portals, that being Wandering Trainer and Wandering Vendors. Now the dummies are gone for golems or sentinels that function like units and will actually deal damage. These sentinels count as actual units and can gain the benefits of augments like cybernetic bulk, and these sentinels can usually solo all of stage 1. Honestly, these sentinels are so cool. I love this change so much, especially when it's wandering sentinels. The spats on the sentinel can actually now make a difference and do something unique, unlike when they were on the dummy. It's so funny watching a sniper or duelist sentinel just do their thing and spam autos and whatever. Although that could be a problem, as some sentinels' damage could be really high solely depending on what spat they get. So this change could potentially exacerbate the difference in high or low rolling spats between players. Arcanist, Reaper and Duelist particularly could be warping. And if you have a melee heavy comp like Duelist, the Sentinels could end up impeding the pathing of your units, and you could just end up with some of them standing around waiting to move. But those are the only minute problems I could find really with this new change, and honestly overall it's awesome. I don't think these potential problems are likely to occur that often anyway. But genuinely, I've had a lot of fun playing this portal already, and I love this change. It's so good. It's such a good change, honestly. But with that, let's get into the balance changes, and let's start with Ghostly because this trait has been completely dominating the meta right now. So the trait itself is indeed getting enough. The damage amp is going down by 20% at 4, 25% at 6, and around 9% at 8. And Shen's damage reduction is going down at 3 star, which will hurt Ghostly Reroll and Ethereal Blade Shen. However, as I mentioned, this trait is getting indirect buffs. Firstly, Morgana is seeing around a 6% damage buff at 1 star and 2 star, but remember that 6% gets even bigger with AP and items. But more importantly, units like Ashe, Xayah and Xayah are seeing huge buffs to their base AD, which scales insanely high with items, augments and traits. These units are amazing on a Ghostly board because of their high damage outputs, and there's actually already a Xayah Ghostly comp that's already performing well in the meta. Additionally, most of the Ink Shadow items are seeing buffs, which in turn makes the Ghostly comp stronger since they splash Ink Shadow. I mean, the Ink Shadow trait itself is also getting buffed, but only at 7, so it only really affects the high vertical if you get a spat. But with the buffs to Xayah, Xayah, Ashe, and the Ink Shadow items, it opens up more Ghostly comps because every single one of those units can be great carries on a Ghostly board. So overall, I think Ghostly will be more common in this patch because you have more options. For example, if you don't want to reroll Senna, you can still go level 8 for Xayah or Ashe. If you get crit items, then you lean towards Xayah, but if you get attack speed items, then you lean towards Ashe. Personally, I've been playing this version of Ghostly Xayah as I prefer having Trickshot active and I like how the units mesh together. But there is another version which was in a Reddit guide that I'll link in the description. Xayah particularly is really strong with Ghostly because her damage is over time. And since each individual instance of Xayah's damage can crit, on average, Xayah is dealing more damage. And that damage gets further amplified by Ghostly. But one thing I should stress is that if you ever get a Ghostly spat, do not put it on your carry. As Asa mentions here, that is bad because it's wasteful. Each Ghostly unit can only proc the trait once and send 2 Spectres. So it's just better to give the Ghostly spat to a frontliner who will proc it the fastest through tanking, and in the meantime that unit can regen some HP and stall, buying time for your carry to do their thing. The only problem I've come across with Ghostly is needing both MR Shred for the Ghostly damage and armor reduction for your carry's damage. But if you get both of these, you can absolutely melt boards. It's just insane. So overall, I don't think these Ghostly nerfs are enough. The utility of this trait can be abused by so many units, and since more late game units are viable in this patch, ghostly boards can be extremely flexible and in turn reliable. But let me know what you think. Anyway, let's talk about some of the huge nerfs, specifically Fated and Mythic. Firstly, Yasuo's tankiness is plummeting, and his shield scaling is almost getting halved. Genuinely, I do not think Yasuo will be relevant at all this patch because he just cannot do anything into late game boards. He'll still be okay in the early game, but he will fall off a cliff very quickly, especially with the nerfs to Stoneplate, which I'll talk about more later. I mean, I guess now he's more like a one cost, but being one of the only 2 tanks in Fated will make the trait suffer because you have less options. Speaking of, the other tank in Fated is also getting nerfed. Now, this Thresh nerf is to his Fated bonus and his shared resistances. So Fated as a whole is substantially less tanky and now could have a major frontline problem that will make chasing the vertical very difficult. Across all of the games I've played on the PvE so far, I've literally not seen anyone bar myself and Mortdog play Fated. And from what I saw, neither of us had good success. Although that shield value and the tankiness from linking Yasuo and Thresh was still really difficult to get through. I know these nerfs were made to stop these huge shields being a thing, but funnily enough, I feel like this change makes the Fated midgame super reliant on pairing Yasuo and Thresh, because it makes up for what Fated lacks so much. But moving on to the Mythic nerfs, Bard on kog'maw are getting domed. Firstly, kog'maw will now need 3 casts to gain more range rather than the previous 2. So this will slow down his damage and scaling tremendously, as he will likely get stuck into frontline units for around his first 10 casts or so. That is insane. While I do think kog'maw reroll will still be reliable with how easy it is to play, it won't be nearly as powerful. And speaking of, we also have this Bard nerf, which may seem small, but this slows down Bard tremendously, especially if he has double Rageblade. This means that Bard's damage output will take longer to ramp up and he won't be instantly obliterating your board. And honestly, my reaction is, thank God, Bard will actually feel like a 3 cost now. The set's only just begun and I've already become so sick of Bard, but I think this change will help that and you kinda love to see it. But you know what else you love to see? Buffs to your favorite units. Specifically, Diana and Soraka are seeing some pretty nice buffs. Soraka's base damage is going up by around 5 to 10%, but again, that gets increased a lot by Soraka's passive, her items, and how many units her ult can hit. And this Diana buff means that she'll be casting more, healing more, and then giving more AP to Soraka. So these buffs are huge for the Diana Soraka reroll comp. I'm working on the guide for that now, but I'll show you the comp now. There's also a Tristana buff which should make vertical duelists a lot stronger, but it also enables a super secret Tristana tech that is very disgusting. So I think she should target Bard here. She does! She does! Oh my god! No! Oh my god! Again, I'm working on the video for this now, but if you want to find out more, then join the Discord and read the TFT discussions channel. All the info is there. Anyway, there's also buffs to Lux and Kindred, which should open up and enable their reroll potential, particularly with Twin Terror. Although the buffs to Lux are much larger, especially when you consider that Arcanist is also getting some pretty juicy buffs. So be in the lookout for opportunities to play these comps next patch. They're definitely not Giga S tier, but they can still win you games from the right spot. But with that covered, let's move on to the item changes. 14.7 will also bring nerfs to items that have been overperforming, whilst also buffing some items that have been absolutely terrible. Firstly, the base items that are getting nerfed this patch are Morello, Ionic Spark, Stoneplate, and Hextech Gunblade. These items are still good in the next patch, but not nearly as good as they were before. And the item that's getting buffed is Sterak's Gauge. This buff should encourage players to slam this item early game, rather than only getting it from late game anvils or carousels. Likewise, the Radiant items are also seeing similar changes. Radiant Red buff, Radiant Ionic Spark, Radiant Morello, and Radiant Stoneplate are getting some pretty sizable nerfs. Especially that true damage on the anti-heal items getting cut by a third is going to be very noticeable. But there's also huge buffs to Radiant Hodge and Radiant Steadfast Heart. Fist of Fairness feels really great now, especially when you combine it with other crit items like Infinity Edge or Guardbreaker due to that extra crit chance. So if you get Fist of Fairness, make sure you build some crit. But similarly, augments are getting buffed overall and now they'll grant more expensive units. For example, trait augments like Mind Over Matter will now grant more expensive units. But the Story Weaver augment will be getting nerfed. This will just make it more inconvenient and cause you to lose some HP as you're trying to find that Riven, but this shouldn't be too bad overall. Something I'm actually looking forward to is the buff to Venerable Piggy Bank, because now that will make my 5 Exalted challenge so much easier. But in the same vein, something I think is very scary is this buff to kog'maw. Now, this damage buff won't usually matter, but it will be giga insane when you get kog'maw's hero Augment. With the Augment and some scaling, kog'maw will one-shot his target repeatedly, which will farm you a ton of gold. The amount of gold this Augment can give you is astronomical, and you can do so much with it. Personally, I'm still debating it, but I think this Augment is an instant take next patch. Similarly, Yorick's hero Augment is getting buffed by 25%. I thought the damage from this Augment was already insane, but I still think even with this change, you gotta be in the right spot to take this Augment, which is the same case for Garen's hero Augment, which is also seeing a 25% damage buff. But with the buff to Garen's hero Augment, I am now certain that his best in slot is BT, Titans, and Dragon's Claw if you ever get his hero Augment. Now, alongside Garen, Kayle is getting some much deserved changes. Firstly, the value of splashing 3-story Weaver and enabling Kayle's utility is drastically decreasing. This will especially affect comps where they splash Kayle for a free 30% Shred and Sunder. But in return, investing into Kayle's damage will be far more rewarding, especially when you stack Scroll of Force with Tome of Power. These changes should make Kayle be more of an actual carry summon like she's supposed to be rather than utility, which is good, but that should cover most of it. And it does look like that this is another patch that will not bring any of the new artifacts. Apparently the earliest we'll see them is patch 14.9. But in the meantime, what do you guys think of these changes in 14.7? I for one am really scared of the kog'maw hero Augment because now it feels like he can generate infinite gold. But I'm still really looking forward to the Diana and Soraka buffs. But yeah, now I'll pass over the questions to you guys. Do you think that ghostly changes are a net buff or a net nerf? Are you looking forward to the new artifacts? And am I overestimating the power of these buffed hero augments? Let me know in the comments and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me. And as always, thank you for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.